All right, good morning. We are ready for Genesis Part 2, Lesson 6. We are in Chapter 9 of Genesis. We've had some really good lessons up to this point, trying to build doctrines, and that's really kind of been my goal from the beginning, and I hope you all have been following along with that and catching that. We talked about last week the fact that, God is building these doctrines for us, but he's doing it through the narratives. So more so than declarative statements, although there are some, and we're starting to see a little bit more this week, right? A lot more declarative, this is what you're allowed to do or not allowed to, and this is what I want you to do. And we also have another first this week. Did y'all see the other first?
Eating food, eating meat.
Well, there's that. But a real significant subject matter comes up this week, and there's a nice rainbow in the sky. The subject of covenant, right? First, did y'all not notice that? This is the first use of the word covenant in Scripture. Now, I get excited about that because I've taught the topical study of covenant many, many times, and hopefully we'll do that again sometime soon for those of you who have not had that chance to do that. But covenant is fundamental. After all, New Testament, Old Testament. Do you know how else that can be translated? Old covenant, new covenant, right? So this is a real significant, profound first in here. In any event, so today we're going to kind of step back and do a little bit more of process work so that the newer students, and I have quite a few actually new ones, although I'm looking around this morning and I don't see my new ones here. But the newer students that we do have, this is going to be a week for them to see a little bit more of the process of doing these inductive steps. So we're going to do them together. They're on the Zoom. Oh, good morning, everyone. I'm glad you're there. So you'll get a chance to kind of see some of the fundamentals of inductive Bible study. So let's get started on that. Let's start with looking at Genesis chapter 9 and doing some of those basic observations. When you open up any new chapter, as the Bible breaks it down for us by chapter, the first thing you want to do is you want to look for and mark your keywords, right? Now, we're in what kind of literary work? Historical. So what are going to be some of your major subjects? Who, what, why, when, where, how? Yes. That's how you answer about those subjects, but what are the major subjects of? People, places, and events. Okay, good. So keep that in mind. Let's look at these keywords then. All right, keywords. What did you find in chapter 9 are your keywords?
Covenant.
Oh, let's just start off with that one. I like that. That's one of my favorite subjects. I love that subject.
Blood.
The blood. The earth. Okay. And what did I just tell you if it's a narrative that you're looking for? People, places, events. Okay.
So Noah and his son.
How about Noah? There we go. Noah. And then sons. And then she had you distinguish them, right? Yeah. She said mark them in a distinctive way. How did you all do that? Just color. That's what I did. I colored one blue and one red. Oop, I don't have red. I'll have to use pink. He'll be a pink boy instead of a red boy. Almost looks red. And then I made another one in green, right? And I'm showing you this because sometimes people are really frustrated by marking. I don't have a problem with it, but some people do. Then what oh, actually, that was supposed to be purple. Purple. I knew there was a distinction. So I'm going to fix it because I had a system and I don't want to mess myself up when I'm looking at it. Okay. Okay, that's my purple. And then on the other ones, for just the general term of sons, which what is going to happen is eventually you're going to leave the 3 boys specific and you're going to move into just a bloodline about the sons specifically. So on the subject of just sons, I did all of them in blue. Okay? That's how I did it, to help me later be able to drop those 3 colors and move into, but still the symbol is sons, and I wouldn't get so confused when I move on. Because otherwise, if you're circling and just coloring in, you kind of forget now what color and what is the symbol I'm doing. So for me, that's how I solved the problem for myself, and I'm just sharing that with you so you have a little tip, okay? All right, so we see the word blood. I used a little teardrop like you would for blood, right? Okay. And what about covenant? Well, I did covenant by putting a red box around it, which is now pink because that's the only color I have, and then I colored it in yellow. But you can do whatever makes sense to you. Now, the reason I picked those 2 colors was the idea of the yellow made me think of the faithfulness and the promises of God that, you know, he's holy, so yellow to me is a holy color. And then I used red for the blood because most covenants are cut by the shedding of a blood. So we'll talk about more of that later. All right, any other major words?
So this was a repeated phrase.
Okay.
And it's where the I wills, God saying I myself, I will.
Very good. I will.
I said.
Yeah. So sometimes I do that and I just give them an underline with a color just so that I pick up on them without taking up too much coloring on my sheet and it gets too crowded.
All flesh.
All flesh. Now, one of the things that's very interesting to consider when you're thinking about some of these key words is you do know that there are many times there's going to be subjects that are going to be brought up in the chapter that you're working in like this, but then you move into the next chapter and it's dropped, right? So just always kind of keep that in mind when you're picking how you want to mark things and how distinctively you need them to kind of pop out on the page. Any others? The rainbow, yes. Bow. And I think along with the bow can, you said you said the bow, but it is also the rainbow, which is what we understand it to be. And what is also the rainbow called? A sign. So you could actually use the word sign and mark it in the same way you did your word bow if you wanted to. In this context, it works. Now, every time you do homework, you kind of have to reason things through and say, are they distinctive enough that this author is making 2 different addresses? In this case, is it okay to put sign and bow together? Yeah. Oh,
Or you have the sign of the covenant also.
right, which is a what?
I have a big C over my covenant.
Okay, C for covenant, correct. But then when you get to the word sign of that covenant is the rainbow, then these 2 words, bow and sign, could be marked in the same way if you wanted to, was my point.
Back to some of our other studies where they use the stop sign and the
Right, and you absolutely could do that. I'm just, and my point is that every context that you're in will kind of help determine. So when you move from the book of Genesis and you move into another book, sign might need to be really distinctive. Remember, we marked sign in Revelation, right? There was a great sign in heaven, and so we used a stop sign for that one, right? So all I'm trying to do is talk it through with you so that new students are getting the idea that there is no hard and fast rule. You mark it in the way that makes sense to you. Oh, the only time it becomes a problem is if you've marked it and then later you figure out, ooh, I really need to distinguish that. Like, for instance, there was an example of that when we did In That Day, or The Last Days, and we found out in one case it was talking, or at his coming, that was the one, his coming. Which coming are you speaking of? His coming in his first coming, you're talking about his second coming, or are you talking about his coming for the church, or are you talking about his coming to rule and reign? One of the comings is his coming for us, the church, which is actually the rapture. The other coming is his coming to rule and reign, which is at the end of the tribulation. So in those cases, you have to mark them distinct. You kind of have to reason things through. So here's what happens for me. Sometimes I mark things, and I find out in the middle of my work, I should have marked them two different things. All you have to do is add an extra color, put a different color of a box around it, put a squiggly line on it, put a stick underneath it to make it look like a sign. I mean, you can sometimes be creative and just fix the little symbol, the color or the symbol that you marked your thing with. So just know this, I don't want anyone to get stressed out about marking. Marking is there for your assistance, right? It's to help highlight these major key words that you notice them, and so that then later you can go back and make a list on them, right? So that you get your facts dug out of the text. Okay? Okay. So we have Ham, Shem, Japheth, the three boys. We have the rainbow or the bow and a sign. We have Noah. We have a couple of other things. We have at least a subject matter that comes up in verses 1 through 3. What is the subject matter? What is the storyline there? What is the instruction that's being given about? What is the emphasis? What they're allowed to eat. It's the food, right? So even though the word food is only mentioned once, it probably should be marked as a key word, okay? Because, in fact, all three verses are talking about the food subject, right? Okay, just so you know that. Food. Okay. So with that said to you, I now want to say to you that the next part of this process, although that may not be an exhaustive list of all your keywords, you may have marked others. The next thing you want to do when you're working with any kind of a narrative is get your flow of thought. And so you need your paragraph divisions figured out, and you need to kind of outline your chapters so that you see how it's flowing, where it starts and where it's leading, right? And then you want to kind of step back and all together say, now, on the whole, what do we see going on in here? What is the major emphasis? What's being revealed to me or shown to me through all of these different points that are being made? So let's do our outline together right now, because I think that'll be helpful. So this is going to be your paragraphs. So we're going to title our chapter 9 outline, or paragraphs. Okay. And I'm going to leave room for the theme up here, which is your title. But we're going to go in and we're going to try to break it down. Now, there's also no real magical thing about where you make your paragraph divisions, but the rule of thumb is what you're looking for is in your flow of thought as you're reading what your author is writing about, is when does he change subjects? Does that make sense? Okay, so tell me, where would you make your first break in Genesis 9? Oh, that's good.
Be fruitful and multiply. Then it talks about that whole dominion piece.
You are absolutely right. And you know what? I didn't do that. I'm going to fix mine. Thank you for teaching the teacher.
1 and 7 are kind of like a bracket, because he repeats in 7, be fruitful and multiply again. So
I made it
it's
1
almost
through
like
7.
Bookends.
bookends, be fruitful and multiply, but in
All right.
between is detail about how to be fruitful and multiply.
Kinda, but not exactly. Because in between, in verse 2 and 3, it's not about being fruitful and multiplying, but
Well, except protecting the life. Protecting life and how you eat now, which has changed from Adam and Eve.
yeah, right.
Then you're not going to multiply.
Okay. Okay, so if you wanted to, so here's the thing. If you want to mark it verses 1 through 7, what are you going to title that flow of thought? What is the major thing going on in verses 1 through 7, do you think?
God gives them a new food rule.
It seems to me like the emphasis is about the food. Yes, you're multiplying and filling the earth, but it's also how you're going to feed yourself in that scenario of multiplying and filling the earth.
It was
said he blessed them and then gave instructions.
Okay, that'll work. That'll work. Okay, theme. So let's do 1 through 7. Instructions. Now, interesting. Thinking about the idea that he's giving them instructions, but you mentioned some of these instructions, had he given them before? Okay, so one of the things Kay had us do was to make a chart, right, on one of the day's homework, and it was kind of like before the flood, after the flood, right? So I looked, let's kind of mark that.
Made me think about Cain, Adam and Eve, and the initial be fruitful and multiply, and then Cain being thrown in there with the whole shedding of blood. And, like God's going back and doing that, but being clear.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of, I think what I'm going to try to do is really make it super concise. I'm not going to write the whole sentence or give you all the fullness of it. But the first thing you said, James, was that it was about being about multiplying and filling the earth. So let's put on here multiply.
And fill the earth. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth.
Multiply and fill earth. Okay, and we see that the first time before the flood, it was in chapter 1, where? Do you remember? Verse 28. Then afterwards, he says the same thing, multiply and fill the earth. So how would you define that when God has already said it to you once? He's destroyed everything. Now you're getting off the boat. Now he's restating it. Now, how would you define that?
It's just reminding them, don't forget these rules still apply
Okay.
in this new world.
Because you're starting all over. So it's almost like he is reinstating. He is affirming, basically, my plan has not changed, right?
Except in 128, it says be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it.
Yes. Now,
I think there's a dominion piece that follows here in 2 through
So
about
I think he
4.
said subdue when he said in this area about all the animals are going to be afraid of you and you need to rule.
yeah, right. And we're gonna go through all the differences. I am gonna point that out because there are some distinct differences, right? It's almost like he laid down the primaries first. These haven't changed, but concerning the fact that I want you to fill the earth, here are some tweaks, right? It's new and improved world, right? We got the world, but we're adding some additional things in here to upgrade for the need. Okay?
So when you talk about, multiply, fill the earth piece, there's the creation, create life, and then in this one and don't snuff it out.
Yes.
So I mean, there's 2
Yes.
pieces to this.
There
the
is.
plus And don't do the minus.
That's right. Exactly. So, because we're going to talk about that. I actually did an entire, you're going to see my one page here. Now, when I send you this page, these are my thoughts. I'm talking through some of these things because we see some changes. Why the food change? Why now death penalty, but there wasn't before? Why is now government being installed, right? So we're going to talk that through. This is the part that I think is the fun part because this is where you start meditating on all this. Right now what we want to do is get the clinical pieces up on the board so that we can see, for new students in particular who are trying to learn how to just gather the nuts and bolts and lay them out, and order them or separate them. I like to compartmentalize things. This goes in this drawer, this goes in this drawer. Did you ever do that when you helped your kids clean their bedroom? What a mess, right? Put all the red toys here. No, I didn't do that, but almost. But if I can help you as a teacher learn how to pull the pieces off this page and put them in boxes or in drawers so that then you can open that drawer, examine what's in there, and then once you're done analyzing it, you can go back to the full context of what you've seen, and it has now been fully developed, right? And that's what we're trying to do as inductive students. Break it down to its smallest point, expound our insight, then bring those insights back to the context and say, now what was he actually saying here? Does that make sense? ordering and clarity. Thank you so much. Yes, okay, so the first thing he says, it has to do about instructions. And concerning instructions, we have one thing, if you look at it from the perspective of 1 through 4, it's, yes, fill the earth, we've got that, but it's also then about that subject of food, right? What does he say about food?
It's all yours.
Yep, yeah.
But it's new that the animals are afraid of him.
Well, because they're gonna eat them.
Well, but it's also, it's committed, so you can trust.
They're afraid because
It is new, and we're going to get there. All the new stuff, we have to kind of lay the pieces on the board and then step back and say, well, what's the same? What's different? Because that's how that is in fact what you did in your homework lesson if you didn't notice. She had you go through and list the things that you observe, and then she says, now, how is that different from? And then she directed you back to Genesis 1, right? And hopefully most of you picked up on the fact that there were little differences. For me, I am one of those people, I really do have to lay it right side by side. So what I like to do when Kay asks me to do that, I make a chart like this on my Word document. I copy and paste the verse that she gave me in chapter 1. And then the one where we are in chapter 9, and I paste it in here, and then I see them laying side by side, and then I can compare and see where things have changed. If I don't see it that way, for me, it's not as easy. Now, some people are really, their brains are brilliant, and they just are able to read and go, oh, this has changed. You know, they see it right away. I have to have it a little bit more clarified. So I'm telling you what I do to help me find those differences.
Well, it's even a better picture having this now to realize what the garden was like, where the lion laid down with the lamb, and where we're going, and how we're getting back
Yes.
literally to that.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah, which is where she took us on what, day 4 or 5 in Isaiah, right? Exactly what she wanted us to see in the end. So okay, one of you said he was told before the flood they were told to do what concerning the animals, because we got the new food law. But before he said about the animals, do what? Yeah, subdue and rule, right? Over everything, basically. And that also was in 128, the second part of that sentence that you just mentioned, Susan. But now, what's concerning the animals, how is it different?
Now you're going to eat them.
Yeah, now you're going to eat them. And so before that, now what does he say about them?
Similar to, though, at the end where it says, into your hand they are delivered.
Yes.
If they're delivered in your hand, then it's the same. You're ruling over them.
It's not that, but then he added on to there what? What did he say in verse 2? What's going to happen with the animals now? There's going to be a fear and terror of you with those animals. That's not subduing and ruling in the same manner. In the garden, it was, come here, kitty, 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 and here comes the big lion and you're petting it and you're, there was a harmony and a peace between man and his environment before the flood. Now we're...
Remembering that all animals ate the grass.
That's right.
No carnivores.
Exactly. So, okay. So we got the fear and terror.
So subduing and having dominion over them wasn't a controlling, powerful thing?
Say it again.
Wasn't a thing of power when it was subdue and have dominion over them?
There's still a measure of power and dominion, but now the animals are afraid of you. So there's the contrast.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
See?
Before they just kind of obeyed.
They just obeyed. They just simply, I think about Noah. How did all those animals come on the ark? Here, kitty, kitty.
One big happy family.
One big happy family, and it was fine. But once he got them off that ark and let them go, now the fear and the terror is in their heart. And now they're going to scatter and they're going to hide from you. Ask my husband when he goes hunting how hard it is to find those guys. Yeah. Yes, yes. So this is a stark difference in before the flood and after the flood. And it's just, and there's reason behind everything that God is doing in this, which is what we're heading toward figuring out. Okay.
I know I'm getting ahead.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
On your list, my question is, it looked like to me that man's not ruling.
No, he is ruling, but it's now it's very much like, do you remember in the garden when God said to Adam, what was his curse? Now by the sweat of his brow. Before, how did he work? He tended the garden. Little water here, little water. Yes, it was all easy peasy, right? But after the sin came the harshness of him having to really sweat it out to get those plants and animals, I guess, in the tending of them and the care of them. It became much more laborious. And certainly, for sure, what happened to the soil, what came onto the earth? Thorns and thistles. So now he had an obstacle in his path.
Is it the same, I mean, with the fear and the terror of the animals, it's gonna be hard for man to hunt, you know?
Right. Because they're going to be hiding. That was exactly what I said. My husband, he comes home, night after night. No, I didn't see a thing. Didn't see a thing. He said, I know they're there. I know they're there, and they're watching me. Right. So this.
All the animal attacks, I didn't see still fear. I mean, I know you have animals, but look at all of the animal attacks that's happening around. When I read that verse, I thought, is that really what's going on?
Yeah, I think so. I think the animals are, but I also think that there's, well, no, that they're scared of you. I guarantee it. Walking, you talk about the dove landing on your finger. I have doves in my backyard. When I walk out the door,
They fly because the fear and the terror of you is on them. It is
I
a.
will say this, that there is this whole thing where now the animals are eating other animals, and there's this whole conflict thing. So, could an animal look at one of us and go, bet you I can take them?
Yeah. Well, the lion might when he saw me. He'd be licking his chops, yeah. But quite honestly, we do talk about this often. Nature, wildlife, if they have opportunity, they're not going to confront man. They hide, they run. If you get them cornered, or if you're between them and their babies, then they're going to attack. But generally, animals do not come around where people are. They try to stay far away.
It's interesting that some animals, like pit bulls, and I apologize if anyone has a pit bull, but they're more apt to attack people. It's almost like
Well, they're bred for that. Yes. 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 Okay.
But if you go into to a national park where there's grizzlies, and they say if you surprise one, right, don't run. If you run, they will chase you. They say, stand still, look at them, and make yourself as big as possible. And usually they will walk.
Right,
So that's it.
because again, so we're back to the distinction pre-flood and post-flood. Pre-flood, the animals we were able to subdue and rule over them in harmony. They weren't afraid of us, but now the fear of man is in them.
When we got to go to the Serengeti, we were able to walk up within 4 feet of lions laying down, just looking around and watching.
That's amazing.
Not hungry.
Yeah, they weren't hungry, and right. And the place that you went, these had gotten accustomed to seeing people, and people were not food.
Right.
Now, if
Couldn't get even out of the truck when we got to where the hippos were.
right, there you go. So, okay, so it's just interesting. Okay, now concerning the food, what was pre-flood? What had he given to us? Every green plant.
The fruit with seeds in it.
Fruits and seeds. Okay, and that was in 130, chapter 1, verse 30. That was pre-flood. Now, post-flood, we see what? Everything. Basically, everything shall be food.
Every living thing that is alive.
Yeah, but do not eat flesh with blood. I could have actually, but I think I'm going to put it down here. But do not eat flesh with blood in it. That's so sad. You have to drain it, right. Okay. Now, okay, and so that was in 9:4. So prior, there was no conversation about it, because why? We weren't eating flesh. We weren't eating animals, right? Up here, everything shall be food for you. In other words, animals, all kinds of animals, birds, fish, everything, right? And then he says, into your hand they are given. So I do think the fact that he mentions that into your hand they are given lets us know that they are going to be fearful of you. The terror of you is going to be in them, but I have given them to you, and you may pursue them. So the pursuit of the animal is okay. It's what God designed. Into your hand, given. That's in 9:2. Okay, so that gives us a before and an after on that particular segment right there. That's just verses, what we just covered here, I'll just put it here, is 9:1 through 7, right? Is kind of what I wanted to do is look at verses 1 through 7. The chart should have demonstrated what was the case before the flood and what was the case after the flood, and that you could make the comparison so that you could see that there's been a distinction. Okay, so let's leave that sit for just a moment and percolate. Let's go back to our paragraph outlines. I want to get the whole thing outlined so we can see the flow of thought and where we are right now and where we're heading, okay? And we can see how it breaks down into these paragraph subjects by subject matter, so that particularly new students really get the idea of this. Okay, so you could have said 1 through 7 instructions, and I had broke it down 1 through 4, animals shall be food, and then I did 5 to 7, and what was that instruction? Don't kill people. And I kind of had to reword it because it was so wordy and it was too hard to even come up with the title. I just put a life for a life, because I know what that means in my thinking. It's what has basically been instituted right here.
Capital punishment.
The death penalty, capital punishment. That's exactly right. Okay, so that's 1 through 7. Now we're going to go to 8, right? And how far do we go? What is our next subject?
One thing in verse 6 of that, the same as in the beginning, God's emphasizing because God made man in his own image. The whole don't take a life for life, he's emphasizing.
Right. Yeah, we're going to develop all those points after we get the outline. Let me get the, and I am excited to talk about all this, so I'm really glad you guys have and you guys do have really good insights. That means you did your homework well. What I want to do, though, is what I know you all do not often do is your outlines. You don't do your paragraph titles. If I walk around this room, I bet you most of you don't have them on your page, right? Do you have your outlines on your page? Yeah. Okay. So that's what I'm doing today is I'm trying to train you to get those outlines on your observation worksheets. Why do you think that it's important to do that?
Then you can flip back and find it quickly.
Okay. Yeah. For one thing,
Well,
you
that
just find
forces
things
you
easy.
to really think and summarize it all into something concise.
Right,
Instead of
okay.
all these lots of words, you're like, this is this.
Because when you're reading narratives, what tends to go on? They're all over the place. They're talking about this, and they talk about this, and they talk about this, and you don't see the link. You don't see how they connect together, right? What I'm hoping we're going to be able to do, and we're all done with this, is see this flow of thought, and then come up here then and title, what is all of this about? What is the major thing going on? Yeah? You have an answer?
I was thinking, I thought you were asking what from 8 to.
Yeah, tell me what 8. And how far do you go? Okay, good. That's what I did. So it's right. Just kidding. All right. 8 to 17. And what did you title that? What is the major subject in that segment? About the covenant. Easy peasy, wasn't it? Now, for those of you who are learning this for the first time, the best thing to do is get your keywords selected as you're moving. You've marked the word covenant. It's in there like 4 times, right? In verse 12 and 13 and 15 and 16. Oh, and 17. So it's 5 times. 11, 12, 13, 15. Oh my gosh, did I miss it? 9? Nope, there it is, in 9. Okay, so interesting that it starts all the way back in, in 9. So it's in there a lot, right? So, okay, how many times did we say? 7 times? Oh, that's kind of interesting. There's a number for you. That's kind of cool. Okay, so 7 times. So when you see something that's repeated that many times in the course of a very short amount of space, that tells you that is the major subject, right? And so even though there will be other words that you will mark that are important and are significant, they are subpoints to your major subject, right? They're going to be something that supports what's being discussed there. All right, so how did you title that if you were to look at that? What about the covenant?
Destroy the earth with fire, with water.
Say it again.
God's the author. He's the one.
Yes, he initiates, he establishes, it's God's covenant. So you could say God's covenant with man and the earth. Okay. Okay. Or, you know what you could do? Just God's covenant. And then get all those details picked out later as subpoints. I always say the lengthier your titles are, the harder they will be for you to reconcile with your flow of thought. Okay? Later, what you're trying to do is make your connections of how this is all, what is going on in this chapter and what is the point to it. Do you remember what our author's purpose is for writing? Who is God and who is man? So that's what we're looking for. Once we get this down, we're looking to see, well, who is God and who is man in this, and what is it he's trying to tell us about those two major subject matters?
Like it's his first covenant,
You could.
because it's the first one and it's with everybody, and then it's a covenant.
It's also an everlasting covenant. It has a sign. It is God initiated. It's with all flesh. It's with the earth. You could add any one of those things in there. But what I'm saying to you is those are all details. So if you want to try to make your title real concise, you might do God's covenant. You could say, and it is his first covenant. Now, what we do know is how do we in the Christian world, what do we refer to this covenant as? Noahic covenant. You might want to do something like that, the Noah's covenant, just to understand that it's speaking about Noah. Not that it's going to be that necessary, because we already know we're in the subject matter of Noah, right? Okay, good. Now we're going to move on. Let's go to 18. And what is the next subject? Starting in 18. This is about Noah and his sons, right? And concerning Noah and his sons, what's going on here?
They're blessed, cursed, and enlarged.
That's really good. Blessed, cursed. Oh, I like that. That's really... Now, that would cover if you go from 18 all the way to 27, right? You could say Noah's sons, blessed, cursed. I think I'm going to go with that. 18 to 24. Yeah. Noah's sons, blessed. Actually, you do know who's blessed. Who's blessed in that statement? The Lord is the one being blessed. But blessed, cursed, and enlarged. That's really good. I like that one. Now, let me tell you what, let's talk about some other possibilities, though, because although I really think that's very nice and concise, and for me, that would work. The point of coming up with paragraph titles is for you to understand where you are in the flow of thought. So you have to be able to connect to it and look at that title and say, I know what's going on there. I know what's going on from here to here. So if you're a person who looks at that, though, and sees there's family dynamic stuff going on in here, what is the major subject about the family dynamics?
Well, one son didn't honor his father.
Yeah, so what do you call that? Sin. Okay, so here we have sin. We've just come out of a flow of thought in Genesis 6, 7, and 8, where the sons of God and the daughters of men intermarried. Before that, it split things. It talked about those who walked with God, those who didn't walk with God, right? The righteous and the unrighteous. Now the righteous and the unrighteous marry. The whole world is polluted then, becomes violent and filled with wickedness. God destroys it. Now we're in chapter 9 and we're seeing a new beginning, right? I titled it God's Plan Unthwarted, okay? Because what God is doing now then is he is reiterating or reinstating his initial plan with a few minor adjustments, right? And we're seeing those minor adjustments. What we need to do is discern why those adjustments, why weren't they in place from the beginning? What would be his purpose of having allowed things to go the way they did before the flood, and now after the flood, he's had to make these changes, and why? Not that, do you think God was surprised that he had to make these? Do you think he was even surprised that he had to do the flood? No. Okay, so no, this is where I love when we get to a place in our lives where we, first of all, we give God the benefit of the doubt. We believe that our God is all-knowing, that nothing catches him by surprise, right? He has a plan, and his plan is not going to be thwarted by man. So I looked up a few verses on that. Let me just share them with you because I think they'll be helpful. The first one is in Numbers 23:19, and I just gave myself a title, God's plans won't be thwarted. With God, there's no mistakes and there are no unexpected surprises. Just know that about your God. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? That's in Numbers 23:19. With that as a backdrop then to what we're looking at and observing here in chapter 9, I think we can begin to say, okay, knowing that God's plans won't be thwarted, knowing that nothing surprises God, knowing that there are no mistakes in this, right, other than what man does, God has allowed this for a reason. What we have to do is figure out why the permissive will of God in some things, and then why then the corrections in the new world that Noah has now come out of his ark into. Why have these changes been made? So then the next verse that I looked up was in Deuteronomy. It says, the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness, and without iniquity, just and upright is he. That's in Deuteronomy 32:4. So if God is just, he's perfect, he's faithful, obviously without iniquity, no sin in God whatsoever. He's just and he's upright. Then we go to Malachi 3 and it says, I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed. Now, what does that tell you? Do you remember when he came off the ark now? We're looking at the subject of the covenant, and he's saying, I know the heart of men are totally depraved, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to make a covenant with them, but I'm going to promise them I'm not going to wipe them off the face of the earth again. That's kind of what he's saying right here to Israel. He's saying, I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore, you, O children of Jacob, are not going to be consumed. I've already made this covenant, the Noahic covenant, right? And I'm now telling you, Israel, if it weren't for my promises that I'm not going to wipe you out, you would be wiped out because you deserve it. Because why? What is man like? So full of sinful, which is what we're entering into here again now, coming off the ark. So Genesis is a book of beginnings. Now, God saw all that he made. It was very good, right? Chapter 1:31 in Genesis. Then in chapter 6, and the Lord saw, the next thing he saw is the wickedness of man was great, and every intention of his heart was only evil continually. So first it's good, now they're evil, right? Then the next one he says, I'm going to blot man out. But who found favor? Noah. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. And we talked about this last week. What makes Noah have that kind of favor? Noah and his sons and the wives. They walked with God. They were compliant. They were bowing their knee to God. In other words, they were in relationship with God. They turned to him as their Savior for salvation. They obeyed him, and they demonstrated their faith by what they did, which is what Hebrews 11 tells us. So then in Job 42, I moved to that, which is where I came up with my title for what we're looking at today. In Job 42, it says, I know, Lord, that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So if you think about that, we've got a destruction of the earth. Did that thwart the plans of God? Isn't that awesome? He's not thwarted. He's making a reboot, a restart, a reiteration also, and he's making some adjustments. But do you think his fundamental plan has changed? So all the doctrines that we've laid down so far about who is God, who is man, marriage, what were some of the other subjects? They're slipping my mind. But all these other major doctrinal things that we have covered.
The promise of the seed still stands.
Right, this promise of the seed. And what is sin? And how does God deal with sin? All these things have been laid down. Those principles are still standing. Because God is the same when? Yesterday, today, forever, right? So knowing that then, now we're ready to start really digging into what we're going to be looking at here. Let's finish up this one last little bit then on our outline. I hope that helped you to kind of see where we're heading with this conversation. So we saw that 18 to 24, Noah's sons are blessed, they're cursed. What I put on here, 18:24, had to do with Noah, because if Noah came off the ark, and so did Shem, Ham, and Japheth, what do we know about these four men? What is their standing before God? They're righteous. Okay, does that tweak at all? You're thinking about what you've read in this storyline yet? If they're righteous, and they are, because God saved them, he put them on the ark, but what are you seeing? What does Noah do? What's the activity going on here? He gets drunk and exposes his nakedness, right? Apparently, this is not a good thing. Now, we're going to dig more into it, so hold on to your thinking on all of it. But what I'm saying to you is what we see here is a righteous man who's doing what? Sinning. Another biblical truth about who is man. Who is saved man. Have you considered that? How many times have we struggled with, well, they say they're a Christian, but look what they're doing, right? Now, that's not to excuse bad behavior, and it's certainly not to excuse sin, especially not those overt ones. But what it is teaching us here is a fundamental about who man is, even as a saved, righteous person. Those of us, now we have a great advantage in the New Testament because we also have the abiding Holy Spirit within us. But even yet, with the abiding Holy Spirit, does that make you without error and without sin?
If only.
If only. I wish, right? Wouldn't it be nice if every time I started to do something I wasn't supposed to, God reined me in? That would be so good. He does most of the time, but there are a lot of times when I wish he'd hit me with a hammer. Okay, so we see Noah, I called him a righteous sinner, right? And what we saw his other two boys do, we know what Ham did. And Ham's behavior actually is quite egregious, even more so. If you were to compare Ham's sin to what his dad did, who has the greater sin?
Well, Ham, because he involved other people.
Yeah, Ham. And I've got so much, I've got paper after paper. I did a lot of research and time on this subject matter because I thought, what is the responsibility of a believer in how we handle and deal with other people who are falling into sin or we've caught them in the act of a sin, right? What is our responsibility? How do we go about dealing with it? Well, let me tell you one thing. It's not this way. This is not the way you handle a brother in sin, okay? So we see Ham. So instead of this, I put righteous. Let me get my other pen because it's not coming out. Boy, my inks are righteous sinners, because both Noah and Ham are righteous, but they're both sinning in this scenario here, right? So they've come off the ark. God has done this supernatural, miraculous thing, and they both almost immediately fall into a sin here, it looks like. But what did Shem, Ham, and Japheth do?
Noah could needed to be drinking away his pain of all the dead people.
Seeing his nakedness.
Right. They actually tried to cover it, right? Can you think of a verse in Scripture that talks about covering sin?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
But isn't there a blessed is the man whose sin is covered,
That sounds like a good one. I think it's James 1:1. James 2.2 or something. Yeah. Yes, exactly. I was thinking it covers a multitude of sins, right? Love covers a multitude of sins. That's right. Okay, so righteous sinners. All right, so now let's go on down. We've kind of covered that segment. We kind of know what's going on there. Let's do the 25 to 27. I separated them because I saw a so. Do you see it? Which gives more of like a conclusion statement. It's almost like they set the scenario up for you, 18 to 24, and then starting in 25, he says, so this is what happened next, because they are two distinctive. I think it could even be quite a bit of time frame passed between what happened here and here. However, what you got to pay attention to is the fact that God put them together in the text. Therefore, in his mind, what he wants us to do is to connect what we see here in 18 to 24 with what happens in 25 to 27, okay? There's a connection of some kind of point or purpose so that these two are put right together here. So he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brothers. He also said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. So it's interesting. It's like there's this hierarchy. Then we get Shem at the top, who's the big tent. We've got Japheth dwelling in Shem's tent, and then we've got Ham at the bottom serving both of them. Okay, so that's kind of that's how I visualized it, and when I drew my pictures out.
We might get to this, but can you speak to why he doesn't curse his son, but he curses his grandson?
Okay, good question. Very good question.
And I don't have an answer, so.
Okay, well, I think I can help you with that when we get to that point. Okay, so now 25 to 27 then, what's going on here? Yep, so Canaan. Now see, what you did here was actually do 18 to 27. I did 18 to 24, and then I broke it down at 25 to do the second part, where you put it all together. Are you seeing? I broke it down here. I showed the backdrop, and then I noticed that word so, and I went to my next paragraph. So 25 to 27 is about Canaan being cursed, right? To be a servant, and so there's Canaan cursed, and what's the other one say? Who's being blessed? The Lord of Shem be blessed, right? It's not Shem is being blessed, it's the Lord of Shem be blessed. Okay? Now, what does that tell you then about Shem? Yeah, who's his Lord, right? So in a way, even though the blessing is blessing God, it's also showing this connection of Shem with the Lord as a man who's still walking with the Lord. But yet Canaan is going to be cursed, it says. Canaan is not Ham, it's Ham's son, and he's actually speaking about Ham's sons, the prodigy that will come later. The generations that are coming down the pike. So with that in mind, you can kind of go back to Genesis 5, where we saw Cain, and the prodigy that followed after him went to Lamech, and it just showed a progression of what? Sin. Sin went from one thing, and it just seemed like it magnified and got worse. So here what we see then is Ham commits a sin against his father, right? And the father then, apparently I would say at his death, just like Jacob did, just like Isaac did, right? They would give blessings and cursings to their children at that time. That was traditional. So he is blessing the Lord God of Shem, but then he's cursing Canaan. What do we know about Canaan? I did not spend the time to do this this week, but who's Canaan?
Doesn't Nimrod come from the line of Canaan
Might.
to get to the Babel?
We're going to get there.
think we did that.
Right. Which is why I just said I did not do the research on it because I didn't have time. I had already spent hours about the idea of the sin. But who does Canaan's children become? What is the nation? The Canaanites. Yes. Who comes in and conquers the Canaanites later? Israelites. Yes. So this is what we're looking at here, is what we're seeing is something that's going to happen in the future, not something that's happening in the immediate, but yet God placed it systematically one after the other for you to make a connection. What had Ham done that leads us then to the idea that eventually his prodigy will apparently become enemies to God, not walking with God. Yes. Wow. You could teach an entire Bible lesson about how you're supposed to honor your mother and father off of this. And also about even brotherly love toward one another and how should you confront sin when you find a brother or a sister in Christ who has fallen into sin. We're not talking about the unbelievers who are sinners. We know they're sinners, right? You should expect it of them. But when you're speaking of a believer, a righteous man who God had just saved, got him off of, took him into an ark, the whole family is righteous. That's why I called them righteous sinners. So these are the righteous who have fallen into sin, and how do you deal with that? But what it does do is it gives us a peek into the character of Ham. And that character then, apparently what happens with it? That character flaw in him. It continues on. And somehow that takes the rest of the family, the bloodline, through the generations away. Does that mean no one from his bloodline is saved ever? No, that's not what we're saying. What we're doing is one of the interesting things is when Noah says this, cursed be Canaan and blessed be the Lord of Shem, and then he goes on and talks about enlarged Japheth. Was this just dad talking about his kids, or is there something more to this? Is this just dad on his deathbed saying something nice and mean? Something mean and something nice. Or is it something more?
Well, just from further into Genesis, when you have those blessings, those things come to pass.
What about this one?
So this one comes to pass.
Oh, if it comes to pass, then what is it? It's a prophetic utterance. Oh, it's a prophetic utterance. Though, do you remember even when Jacob and Esau later, they're in the womb of their mother yet, and at a prophetic utterance, the older will serve the younger, right? Okay, so this is what we're seeing here is God, by the Holy Spirit, in the same way that when we went into Peter last week and we talked about how Jesus in the Spirit spoke through Noah and he preached the gospel. Noah was a preacher of righteousness, right? Well, here we have the same preacher of righteousness by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He is now speaking a blessing and a cursing on the generations to come. Does he have that foreknowledge? No. But who does? God. And did that blessing and cursing come true? Yes, it was affirmed because now in hindsight we have history to go back and look at that. So what you can say then is, in a way, if you want to, you might even want to title that the prophetic blessing and cursing, because it would be helpful for you later when you come back and look at your notes. Because you'll probably forget all these things that we're digging out right now. But for you to remember, this was a prophetic utterance will be, I think, quite valuable because it'll put you back in perspective. So you might want to say the prophetic. I think I'll write it in a different color so you see it.
And again, it's going back to
uncovered, but there's never any, I mean, thank you, there's never any consequence for him. It seems like he just wakes up and then he's like, I'm blessing.
You're right. We don't know about it. So what does that tell you in the storyline?
Are you saying it's not important?
It's not important in this storyline.
Wow,
I know.
wow.
Not in this storyline. Because what we're seeing here is the point is not what he did and how God dealt with Noah. The point is these are righteous men and they're sinning. And this is what God wants you to know about man. Man, even men who love God, can sin and do sin. Okay? That's what he's wanting to grab hold of. If you get lost in all those details, especially for people like myself who've got a lot of alcoholism in my family and people around me, right? We can get wrapped around the axle on just that one subject matter and miss the big picture. The big picture here is Noah sinned. Oh my gosh, this is Noah. He just saw a miraculous thing that God did, in the terror and the horror of being on that ship during that time. He comes off the ship, he's been off the ship long enough to grow a vineyard, and now he's gotten drunk and exposed himself. And there's a whole nother storyline, the idea of indecent exposure, right? But one thing I did notice, it came to me after I read it just the other night, where it says, verse 21, somebody read that out loud.
He drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent.
So where is he? In private, at home. And
We also can know that just natural consequences, there is a fracture between the father and son.
apparently, that's a subtlety that's not necessarily brought out either, but apparently Ham has got some kind of real burr in his saddle or whatever about his dad, because what should he have done?
You should just covered him up.
He should have done what his other two brothers did. Yeah, let it be, let him sober up, and then the next day go back to his dad and say, hey, Dad, I came in on you. I saw you in a drunken state and exposed. I covered you to keep your dignity. And I didn't go tell anybody. But I'm telling you, I saw you, and you got to knock it off. Right? Right? I don't know how you want to say it to your dad. Do it politely. If it were me, I'd say knock it off.
Don't take a picture with your cell phone and post it on Facebook.
Right. Yes, exactly. Okay, now, this is something that's really important in my life. When I grew up in my household, it was a big stinking deal if you went out and exposed your brother and your sister's sins to the world. I could not go to school after my brother David did something bad and he got a spanking, and go to school and tell all my friends, David did this and this and this, and Mom spanked him. If my mom found out I did that, guess who got a spanking? Right, because my mother's quote was always, do not air your dirty laundry. You keep your private matters, your home life, home. I mean, if you need outside help because it becomes that big of a deal, then you do that at the appropriate time. But the little things like this one actually is kind of a little thing. People get drunk, sometimes not even on purpose, it's by accident, right? They have one too many glasses of whatever they've had. And it's not to belittle drunkenness or alcoholism, because those are really bad, and we all have been hurt by that in some way or another probably. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is, yeah, Dad did something he shouldn't have done. It was a sin. But the real issue here is what Ham did with it.
But was it really a sin? Because he had the vineyard, he drank, and yes, he drank too much, but he didn't deliberately.
Well, we don't know that. The implication of the storyline here is he sinned, and then Ham came behind him, exposed him to his brothers. If exposing him to his brothers, and if what he had done was not a sin, then exposing to his brothers would not have been a big deal.
But he still was a righteous man at that point.
Yes, of course, they're all righteous. All of these men, all four of these men are ark. And they all came through.
New Testament, and there's many a list that talks about, things that are sinful and bad. Gossip is one of them. And so, if what Ham's deal was is he was gossiping, he was spreading this
Right.
then yeah, that's,
Okay, so I just went through and I found what should he have done? Because the point here in this, Carol, is not that did he sin? He sinned. Dad did sin. And they're letting you know that through the narrative, that what he did was wrong. His son caught him in it, and then he went and ratted him out to the brothers. Shouldn't have done that. You don't do that. You don't expose somebody's sin unless it's really serious and it needs help. You can keep some. Would you say there are sins that you and I do that somebody could come to us privately and say, Katie, I saw you do that, or I heard you gossiping, or I heard whatever, but privately tell me that and let me go to the Lord and correct it. And if I do, then good. Now, if I don't, and especially if the sin is something that really affects other people, and we did talk about this before about sins, how they do affect other people, right? But if it's a minor thing and it's not a big deal, do you need to expose everybody's sin about everything?
The point is to try to restore people to walking with God.
Yes.
Anytime you're
Yes.
anybody, the point is, how do I help you be sure that your relationship with God is not?
Right. Okay. So I have like about 60, it's front and back of all these pages. But I'm only going to read you 3. Aren't you happy? Galatians 6:1 says this, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him. You know how? In a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. I thought about Ham. That's exactly what happened. He stumbled on his father having committed this act of sin, maybe deliberate, maybe not deliberate. We do not know. It doesn't tell us, but he did it. But instead of covering it up and going to him in gentleness later to try to correct him, he outed him to the brothers, which, by the way, breaks one of those 10 commandments about honoring thy father and thy mother, right? Okay, then the next one, in Matthew 18:15, it says, if your brother sins against you, now I don't know that this was a sin against Ham, Shem, or Japheth. It was just a sin. So he wasn't doing something bad against someone, but still I'm going to read what it says. If your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. Okay? The last one is in 1 Timothy 5:20. It says, as for those who persist in sin, rebuke them then in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. Then you expose. So if he had gone to dad, corrected dad, then the next week he comes back, there's dad drunk again. Now he says, okay, now I have to elevate. Now it has to go to the brothers, and we have to take this more seriously, because this is becoming a habitual thing, and he obviously did not learn his lesson from being exposed the first time, literally exposed. Okay, so that's that. Okay, we're good, I think. We're going to do okay. All right, so lengthy possibilities on study right there about how do you handle the righteous sinner, right? Your brothers have also another lengthy study in there about relationships between children and their parents and the idea of respect. As a matter of fact, it's one of the few commandments that comes with a blessing. Honor thy father and thy mother so that it will go well for you. Does it go well for Ham? Okay, so maybe that's a link to what we see down below then, when later his family and prodigy becomes cursed, and the Lord foresees this and utters it through Noah, and literally is saying to him, there's a character flaw in Ham, and it's going to get passed on. And his family bloodline is going to intensify in their kind of behavior, to the point that eventually they don't even walk with God, and I'm going to destroy them off the land that they will be living on. And God does that through Joshua when Israelites come in later. 800 years later, God destroys them off the land. The Canaanites are wiped out. All right. Okay, so this is our outline. We have the last one, which is that it's a closing about Noah's life, right? 28 and 29. Noah lived 950 years. And he died. And died. Okay, so that takes care of that. That's our now we also did an at-a-glance chart, and I'm going to real quickly run through these. I want to make sure you all are doing this. I heard last week when I said, how are you doing on your at-a-glance chart? Everybody hung their head and went, okay. So if you're not working on your at-a-glance chart, I want you to get yours out, and I want you to start making sure that you get those filled in. At this point, what you should have on it, author, it says date, and the reason I have that on there is because there's an in-text time frame, but then there's an exterior time frame, and that's a unique thing about the book of Genesis, is one of the uniquenesses of it. That is, it was written by Moses later, but it has an interior time frame as the beginning, right? Okay. And purpose, who is God, who is man, and then your keywords. Thus far, primarily it's about God and man, the fact that God is the creator, he created and made all things, right? And then it talks about, I have the word cursed on here, because what we're talking about in that, there's subtitles to all that of sin, the fall of man. I mean, all these things fall underneath that, okay? So chapter themes, chapter 1, tell me your title.
Overview, 6-day creation.
Okay, creation. God created heaven and earth, and it was very good. Kind of anything along those lines, okay? Chapter 2. Okay, has to do with man. All God made, he made for man was my title, but yes, anything has to do with about man and his uniqueness, how he's created in God's image, that would work too, okay? Chapter 3.
The fall. First sin.
Yep. Man sinned, and what happened as a consequence? Death enters, okay? Chapter 4.
The line of Cain, unrighteous.
Okay, Cain, yes, the unrighteous lineage of Cain, or Cain to Lamech, the unrighteous line, or however you want to do it. I do think it should be important to note that we're speaking of an unrighteous bloodline, because the Bible on the whole runs bloodlines. And you're going to see that again when you get into Matthew and Luke and all these other places, and there's a reason for it that God has this. Why do you think it's so important for God to have a lineage that's distinctive and marked out for us? Because it takes us to that seed that was promised all the way back in Genesis. You start with the seed and you got to follow it through. And God is, and not only that, but God was real specific when these covenants, we're starting with this covenant, which is more general with the earth and what God won't do. But later we're going to start getting into covenants where God is saying, through you, I'm going to do these things. And so to see the sovereignty of God, the faithfulness of God, the truthfulness of God, he runs bloodlines for us to follow. And he says, through you, I'm going to do this. Now you can go back and check it. Sure, he did, that he in fact did those things. Okay, so Cain, the unrighteous lineage, and then chapter 5.
Righteous line of Seth.
Seth, the righteous line. Okay, and then chapter 6. Okay, say it again. The flood, okay.
Like God decides to flood.
Okay, God decides to flood. Okay. In chapter 6, actually, there's actually a major sin going on there that causes this whole mess. What were they doing? They were intermarrying. And so what was the issue between man and God there? Since we're learning about who is man, who is God,
Away from God.
we were striving against the Lord. The Lord was striving with man, so you might even want to say that. Or you might want to put on there sons of God and daughters of men striving against the Lord. Or you could just say rebellion spreads. Yeah. I mean, you can make it as concise as you want. You just need to know what's in there. Then chapter 7 goes to that subject of the flood, right? Now what happens in 7 then? Say it again.
Well, I'm thinking it's God's provision to fix the other problem.
Yeah. But what did you title chapter 7?
God saves Noah with the ark.
Okay. God saved Noah
We've already got rain.
with the ark. Okay, that works. Okay. Through the ark. Okay. I just put God sends the flood and the righteous are kept alive. Pretty generic. Chapter 8. basically two things happen there.
Sarah's destroyed and then the first covenant.
Yeah, in chapter 8? 8.
Yeah, so reboot, restart.
Okay, but what we see in chapter 8 is this whole progression of him on there, sending the bird out. And so what's happening on the earth? The waters are dry. Because we had the flood the chapter before. Now what happens with the flood? The waters do what? They dry up, right? So the waters dry up, and then what does Noah do in response to that? He gives an offering to the Lord, right? Aromatherapy, yes. You were listening, weren't you? Okay, now we're in 9. So now we're here. Now let's go back and title this one. Chapter 9, on the whole, what do we see going on? We've had the earth destroyed. They've come off. Now God's going to make us covenant. It's an everlasting covenant. Theme, God's covenant. Okay. And any other thing you need to add into that? What else is going on? Is it just about the covenant in here? No, it's a reiteration or a restatement or a application or a reboot, whatever you want to call it, right? Somehow God is putting back into place the order that he had already given man, and then he's adding additional things into the instructions, right? So what does that tell you about what we said earlier? I said about the Lord. His plans are unthwarted. Because do you think that Satan in the garden was just chuckling when he was watching this going on? I mean, when he went into the garden to cause man to sin and to fall and to disobey God, do you think this was his plan? That this was his ultimate goal, was to destroy what God had created, to destroy this promise that God had made for his created beings, the sons of God that God had created? Yes. And so he was chuckling away, but guess what? Did God's plan get thwarted? No. So I don't know how you want to say that. God resets or reboots, or God reinstates what he started, or God's plans never fail.
You're going to say the plan continues.
The plan continues. There you go. God's covenant and how about that? God's covenant and unthwarted plan. Okay, I mean, however you want to say it, you just got to figure out the wording that makes sense to you and that you understand what's happening here in chapter 9 on the whole is God is putting back into place right where basically you're picking up where they left off, and he's saying, everything that is now gone and destroyed, yes, but that is not undoing my plan. I promised the seed, I'm going to do it. The seed is still coming, right?
Irregardless of the fact that even sin is still intact after Noah.
Yes.
Even though sin has gone through the whole line.
Right.
But there's still going to be a line where my seed is coming.
That's right. And that, in fact, is exactly what he had said. Remember what he said before? He said, I know that man is wicked and depraved, and I know that even for that reason, though, I'm going to make this covenant, and I won't destroy him again like I have. I'm not going to reboot again. Now, with that said, then, why do you think he allowed the first reboot?
Prove a point
Okay, what kind of point?
that even when you have a righteous person, they're still going to sin. Sin is here to stay.
Okay, isn't that interesting? That it seems like there's a subject matter here, again, that goes back to the author's purpose, who is God and who is man. And what we're seeing with God is God's plans never change. He's faithful, he's consistent, and he's also sovereign and all-powerful over it. But on the other hand, we have man. And who is man?
And that actually goes right into what he does again, or is going to do, when he hit Revelation, when he binds Satan. And what happens?
Yes, yes,
And Jesus is ruling and reigning, and still,
yes.
man still sins.
Isn't that amazing? So what we can see then is that we look at the flood and we go, wow, what a mess, and we had to start over. But what was the point, God? What was the point? Well, you know the end from the beginning. You knew where man was heading. Why the reboot? Why reinstate everything all over again? Why did you let that happen so that we had to be where we are right now? What does man... There you go. Okay, God, that's a great point too. So as you're looking at what you're seeing here in 9, there's really a lot more richness to it than really is on the surface. I think that what we are seeing is we have a God who says, have you ever had a child who you could see who was about to do something really dumb and it was going to hurt? But you step back and you go, watch this. He's going to face plant right into that bush, and I just see it coming, and I'm like, I'm not stopping it because I've probably already told him this is what he should be doing. Wear your helmet, ride, this way or that, whatever you told them to do. But now he's not obeying. And that's what man was doing here in this. Man didn't obey. Man didn't follow the plan for marriage in particular. And that's where the whole world ended up going into this depravity. If you marry their daughters, or if you let your sons marry their daughters and you let your daughters marry their sons, they're going to turn away from me, and I'm going to have to take them off the land. And that's what he says in Deuteronomy. That's what he did right here in this Genesis record. So God says, okay, I'm going to let him face plant. And when he does, then I'm going to reboot it. And I'm going to make enough tweaks in it so that I don't have to flood the earth again until I'm done with my plan. And along the way, I'm going to make some minor adjustments. So here we have these adjustments going on, where before there was no animal eating, now there's going to be animal eating. So the question is why? Why the food change? Yeah, because steaks are great and ribs they smell so good. Yeah?
Well, God killed to cover Adam and Eve's sin. And so, did there need to be animal sacrifices?
There were animal sacrifices even before the flood, right? God himself had sacrificed to cover Adam and Eve, so that had already occurred. But
Whatever's going on is God saying he's going to require not only your lifeblood, but I'm going to require the blood from every beast.
right.
So everything's got to die.
Okay, everything's all right. When I was thinking this through, I thought, why no eating of meat before and why eating of meat afterward? Well, no eating of meat before, of course, makes for a very harmonious, peaceful Garden of Eden environment, which is what they had. And it's what God wanted for us, right? But afterwards, God says, okay, I'm going to now institute the eating of meat. What might have happened in the mind of man concerning animals even? I mean, maybe this is just one of the possibilities. What might man do if he had been living in a world where animals were totally protected and cared for? Think about Romans chapter 1. What does it say about in Romans chapter 1? Began to worship the creation rather than the creator. Is it possible that somehow, I even think about Cain when he refused to bring the bloodshed, right? He wanted to bring the work of his own hands. Why did he refuse to do that? Had he elevated animals above other things possibly? Is that maybe, we're just kind of speculating here because God's not saying, well, I think there's a spiritualness behind this. I don't think that God made any of these major law changes arbitrarily. Like one person said, oh, well, they came off the ark and there wasn't enough food, so God let them eat the animals. Does that make sense for a long-term plan change? Could God not have provided in the moment, even supernaturally, for Adam or for Noah and his family? Right. So there has to be a spiritual reason behind this.
When Noah built the altar when he got off, the smell was a soothing aroma to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So something about the sacrifice and the blood, and we know that points to Christ, because that's the soothing.
Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. We know that later in the Levitical law, it becomes for atonement only, right? It's a high holy article in worship before God. So,
Maybe what you're pointing to does seem right, Katie, when you're talking about, so it's about our relationship
Right, because that's
The
what,
relationship with animals had gotten out of whack.
maybe. Okay, let me just read. Animals given as food now help to define the difference between human life and animal life. Have we got a problem with human life and animal life in our world today?
Oh, yeah, we'll
Yeah,
save the
yeah.
eagle's egg, but we'll
You woke up.
yeah, we'll turn the world upside down to save a newt's egg, but we'll kill a baby.
Yes, yes. So are you kind of following where my mind was kind of traveling on this? I was,
Well, in Leviticus, is it Leviticus?
yes,
One, you know, they were having sexual relations with the animals.
yes, yes,
And it was an abomination, and God
right,
killed the
right,
person that does it, kill the animal.
yeah. So,
Oh, and so it's about like it's okay to kill the animals, but you cannot kill each other.
and not only that, but remember, how was man created in comparison to animals? We're in God's image. They're not. What about this? It may be that animal sacrifice may have been twisted in some men's thinking by this time in history as well. They may have elevated the animals, even exalting them, potentially. And we'd see this throughout history, the exaltation of cows in some cultures, or eagles, or lions, or cats, or yes. What about, could men have been making animals above men? We see basically PETA, you know, and all the liberal world there. I thought about that verse, there's a way that seems right unto man, but the end thereof leads to death. You know, they think they're being so righteous, but what they're doing is destroying life for man for the sake of an animal. And that is not what God intended, right? Animals were not created, we were not created for the animals were created for us. So by making this new law, which before they were protected, nurtured, and cared for, and there was no fear of man with them before, but now he's changed that. There's now fear, man is able to eat them. What does that do in the mind of humanity concerning animals? It puts them back in their proper place, right?
9:6, for God made man in his own image. It's what he's following that whole part with. It's like what you're saying. He wants to distinguish again, say, look, clearly, animals are different from you.
Yes. So to me, this change about the food thing seems to be a strategic, spiritual thing. There's something spiritual that had gotten out of whack that God is correcting in the mind to think. Now, we don't know what all was going on before the flood that isn't even detailed for us, but maybe it had something to do with an elevation of the animals.
Whole new light on Darwinism.
Sure does, yeah. What about, even to this day, many people have the habit of personifying animals. My little baby, right? I'm going to go die. When I go to heaven, they're crying because their animal has died. And they're, I'm going to see him in heaven. He has an eternal soul. He lives forever, and he gets salvation just like human beings. Can you see how this could go, though? If God had not corrected things by making this adjustment, he allowed man, though, to have it the other way first. So that man could see what happens when they don't rein themselves in and they don't think spiritually. So then after the flood, he put in place a new foods law so that man would understand animals are here for you. They are a resource for you. They're a provision for you. They're under you. And by the way, they don't have an eternal soul. They don't go to heaven, right? They're a resource. And we're to love them and take care of them, obviously, and we love our pets, but, you know. So this new food provision that makes it clear that animals are a resource then and a provision. Okay, so that was the first thing about food. Then we went on to, how much time have I got? Not a whole lot. Okay, I know, we're having to move quickly then. Okay. So let's do this. New food laws are instituted, okay? What else is added that's now new in our progression of this? Yeah. So there's now a new law.
Even though with Cain, God did say if anybody killed Cain, there'd be vengeance. So there's consequence to murder even with Cain in the beginning.
Yeah, but I think this one is putting in the kill the killer
Yes.
issue. So with Cain, nobody got to be the blood avenger, so to speak. Saved, but now
There you go.
we're going to do blood avenger.
Why do you think it might be that God, think about how rampant in the very little bit that we have about Lamech, for instance, following Cain. Cain kills his brother. Yeah, he gets a mark on him. Nobody can hurt him, right? Which seems like what? Right? Okay, then Lamech says, great, he got away with it. And since he did, and he has a mark on him, then I'm even greater avenged in this. I get to do 7 times 7 whatever he did, and so it became an excuse for him. What do you think the death penalty now does in the new world that they're in? Yeah. What was the first thing you all said in verse 1 that God was what was the commandment for God for us? Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. What if murder again becomes rampant? Then what's happening to the fulfilling of the earth? Right? Now, I know that we have a lot of people who think, well, stop already, the world is filled. Is it really? No. No. But you know what the problem is we congregate in cities rather than spreading out and filling the earth like God said. I'm one of those girls. I like the city. I don't want to live in the country. My husband would love that. Okay, so human life is now basically protected through capital punishment for murder. So the death penalty then makes it clear that human life is highly valued by God. We're distinctive. We're made in His image. And by the way, when people kill other people, then how does God kind of view this then? Since He says, He actually adds that in, for you are made in the image of God. So how is God viewing murder? An attack on Him. If you and I are created in God's image, if somebody murders someone, now we're not talking about, there's nuances to this. We're not talking about war. We're not talking about self-defense, unintentional, that kind of stuff. Those are all, and are there provisions for that in the law? Yes, later. The law gets tweaked and crystallized, and what we see in it then is by the time we get the full picture on it is there's mercy in it, there's allowance for some things. One of the things I thought was interesting was about the priest, that there were these sanctuary refuge cities that we could go to, sanctuary cities. So you could go to the refuge city, right, if you had accidentally murdered someone so that they would not take your life, but you had to stay there until the high priest died. Why?
Justice.
Okay.
And actually, that's what this part in Genesis is talking about as well. Is not only is it filling the earth, but it's also justice.
There you go. So now we're seeing judicial things, civil law for man to be governed under and to live under for pragmatic reasons, right? For practical things. Okay. I've lost my thought.
So I have an observation that
It was really important too.
Jesus wiped out the entire population except Noah and his family. He killed everyone righteously. And so then he says, now I'm going to let you do the killing of unrighteous.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then he makes a promise that he'll never
Right.
do it again.
Well, I was thinking about that priest thing, though. That was my question. That's where we were at. And I'm sorry, it kind of resurfaced. Why the death of the high priest? Why does that release him?
Wasn't like the sacrificing, like all of, yes, all the sins, yeah.
What Jesus did releases us. And
What does Hebrews tell us about Jesus?
he's a high
He is our great high priest. So symbolically, the high priest's death, when he dies, are you catching it? So when he dies, then that is a symbolic imagery of the death or the sacrificial death of the Savior. And in doing that, all sins are forgiven. And so you're released from your sanctuary city. Wow. Isn't that cool? It just came to me when I was doing it. I went, high priest. Oh, the great high priest. Jesus is our great high priest. Oh, if this is symbolic, then the picture in this is when he dies, it's a picture, it's a foreshadow of Jesus dying. And when that is done, all sins are forgiven. So what does that tell you about murder? It's a sin, but
It can be forgiven.
it can be forgiven. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Even murder can be forgiven. Obviously, we as human beings have a much harder time with that. But that's why they've got these refuge cities, these cities of refuge for them to run to. But what he's really showing in that is, okay, we understand the seriousness of it. They've affronted the image of God. That I take that very seriously. And there's a penalty. I feel bad for the guy who gets there and the high priest is brand new and he's still young. He'll be there a long time. But now what the subliminal in all that picture though there is that, first of all, the high priest is representative of Jesus. That's why there can be forgiveness when he dies. And also that also says there is forgiveness for even murder.
Well, and there's a distinction, maybe not now, but coming, where there's a difference between the premeditated kind versus, oh, I did something and my cart rolled over this guy and he died.
That's true. That is true.
That's the guy that's allowed to run.
Yeah. So here we see, basically what I also saw with this change with the death penalty is they are not going to be able to thwart the plan of God to replenish and fill the earth. His idea is to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. God wants particularly Christians to bear more children and raise them up in the fear of the Lord, right? And so if the wickedness of man continued, they were allowed to continue to murder people whenever they, at whim, which is what they were doing. They had this protection through a mark that Cain was given, and that's what they would claim that, well, if the Lord allowed Cain to, then 7 times, but 7 I should be allowed to. But Lamech began to kill people without even real reason, right? It was very arbitrary. But he took it as permission to kill. That's what he did. He saw that as permission. So God is saying no. So he's correcting that. The first mass death penalty was the flood. If you haven't ever thought about that, mass penalty. There's going to be another one like it at the end of the age by fire. This is a visible demonstration that death will come on all who take life and reject the Lord. Okay, then there's one more thing, and that is the introduction of government. Why do you think the introduction of government? What does government do for us? And this is a whole other study, which we didn't do. Gives us structure, order, rules. And what does it produce then in a gathering of a lot of people living in one place? Peace and harmony. Yeah. So what might it be a foreshadow of? If it were actually done pristinely, what would it be a foreshadow of? Heaven, the new earth, the eternal living with God that we're going to be in one day. It will introduce a foreshadow of what peace and harmony in community living can and will be like in the future kingdom of God. A concept that had totally broken down by the days of Noah. There had been that peace and harmony with Adam and Eve in the beginning, and then it just slowly deteriorated. It's going to require an external pressure, though, to impose that on the ungodly and the unruly in this present age. So you need government because there's the ungodly and the unruly, and they need law. Remember that? I think there's a passage in Romans that says that the law is not for the righteous, but for the unrighteous, right? Because they're the ones who will break it. It will provide law and order in the world globally during this era that we're in of kingdoms of men that we're traversing through. Human law is necessary for stability of life for all people because laws are deterrents to wickedness. Also, wickedness should not be going unchecked, as James mentioned earlier. It's justice, and it makes people who have been treated wrongly feel that they've been avenged in their soul, sort of. Government will deter the rapidness of sin and lawlessness as well. Do you remember where he said, I'm going to make a covenant and I'm not going to destroy the earth, but I also know that man is totally wicked. But because of that, I'm making this covenant so that I won't destroy them again, because I'm going to want to, right? But he says this kind of law, this government that he's putting in place here in chapter 9, what this does is this is going to deter or slow down the progression of this place that we are going to, the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, or the days of Noah that they went to. They went to it very fast. Why? They didn't have law or government. They didn't have a death penalty. And they were doing other things like probably exalting animals and not understanding that they were not equal to men. But God put all these things in place to get our minds back in right thinking about who we are, who God is, what our function is, what life is all about, and where we're headed. And the laws then also, for those who are unruly and won't bow their knee to God, the laws, the governmental laws of a civil city, that will keep those people under wraps to a degree. If we enforce them. But what's happening with our world now today? Yeah. We're no longer putting criminals in jail or dishing out justice. So it's going to very quickly, very rapidly deteriorate. And we're seeing it right before our eyes. Yep. So God demonstrated to man his need for law by the absence of it prior to the flood. Are you seeing what I'm saying about there are no mistakes? He knew what happened before the flood was going to happen. He allowed it to teach us some things. In the same way, now that we have the law is a tutor to lead us to Christ. And you learn things by observing the law. What did Paul say he learned most of all by observing the law? What is he? A lawbreaker, a sinner. He said, because of the law, I understand I'm a sinner and I have need of a Savior, right? So I really think that's what we're seeing here. This is this transition. It's a reboot. God's plan has not been thwarted. He goes through systematically, and I didn't write any of it down, but all these, we have the first covenant. We have him dealing with righteous sinners, because sinners righteous people will still sin, and to know that and have that doctrinally right in the text of Scripture for us is really actually a comfort. And it's to make us aware of it, but it's also to teach us that you can't get complacent about it. You can't just say, well, I'm saved, so sin all the more, as Paul addressed, right? Dealing with righteous sinner, Noah, a righteous man, blameless in his time. He walked with God. He was on the ark, but he got drunk inside his tent and exposed himself. Ham, Shem, and Japheth, they were also on the ark, but Ham exposed his father's sin. Now, what did Shem and Japheth do? Covered their father. So there was the example of how to handle it and how not to handle it. I thought that was really good. Then we have God knows the future. We see Ham's son Canaan curse. So we see God giving a prophetic utterance through Noah of the future generations of what it's going to have. The story that preceded it kind of gave us a hint as to what the problem was, why the Canaanite bloodline goes where they go into this. It's through sin, unchecked, undisciplined, as it was with Cain, when God said to Cain, if you do what's right, will your countenance not be lifted? They didn't. I think we covered everything. I didn't get it all written down, but this one was a more difficult one, I think, to really crystallize, other than just bullet points of facts, things that we looked at. We saw new food laws. We saw a new law for murder. We also saw new civil government laws, right? Animals are now prey for man. What else did we have on here? I didn't go through the subject of covenant at all, but that would have been actually an entire study of its own. You could stop right there, spend 12 weeks doing the covenant study, and then come back to this and pick up. That would actually be a really good way to do it, but we're not. So one thing, what did you learn about the covenants there? What were the fundamentals to a covenant?
Well, this was an unconditional one.
Unconditional.
Because it's God doing all of it.
It also included the earth.
Yes, everlasting.
It's an everlasting covenant.
It's his covenant.
And it's God did it. God established it. And it came with a sign. What was the purpose for the sign? for God to be reminded. Do you guys remember we talked about the sea of glass before God's throne, and the tabernacle, that the tabernacle at one point in the tribulation right there at the middle, and smoke billows out, and the ark is there before him, and he says, don't anyone enter until this is finished. It's just before he begins to pour out the bowls. And we talked about the tabernacle being before the face of God as he's pouring out the bowls on the earth. Why? Why? So that God would remember his covenant with these people, that he was going to save all Israel. And so he's working in that at the end of the age to do that. Oh, there's so much good stuff in here. All right.
Can I ask an oddball question? Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't have time for it.
Of course.
So, does this mean that it didn't actually rain from the sky
Yes.
before Noah's flood?
Yes.
And that's how we have the rainbow? Because otherwise, just the way the light works with water, if it had had water cycles, there would have been other rainbows before this.
Nope.
So there was no rain
Well,
in the sky to begin with? It was still just the water and
It was the misting from the, I had that on one of my notes somewhere, but yeah, earlier in Genesis it said that the earth was watered from a mist that rose from the earth, and that's how things were watered. But then the flood came, rain came from below, from above and from below, and from that point on, then we've had rain from the sky, and now God says, so now when you see that rain come from the sky, and you look for my bow in the clouds.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was very obviously, there are some people, did y'all read some commentaries that actually say, there was probably rainbows before and blah, 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 right? And the answer is no, because it's actually a sign that God put in the sky. He set that in the sky, and he said, this is my sign. So it was a supernatural thing in that moment that God did this so that they would. Although I've seen some interesting pictures of Noah's Ark, artwork, and there's always a rainbow. And I'm going, hadn't done that yet. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So thank you guys. That was a good discussion. Very nice. I'll see y'all next week. One more week and we're all done. Aha.